On a Monday, we've got host of The Life and Crimes with Andrew Rule. He has the podcast there. He's also got a book that's waiting for us, Rule on Crime. It's been reissued. That's our popular, updated with the Easy Street murder cases. So we're going to talk about that and much more right now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Run Home with Joel and Fletch, Herald Sun Associate Editor, Andrew Rule. Welcome back to the Run Home, Andrew.
It's good to be with you. I didn't know I'd make it, but here I am.
Well, mate, you're looking very fit and dapper and ready to go. And where do you want to start? We've got so many cases we can cover. We'll lead the ball in your court.
Yeah, I should have worn a T-shirt that fit in. I thought I'd dress up a bit for you fellas, but clearly wasted.
The bookshelf's good too. That shows power behind you, Andrew. We like the bookshelf.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. You like it, yeah. And I've read most of them too. Now, where do we want to start? Well, yeah, the Life and Crimes is interesting. I put out a book of that name because I happen to have that podcast. And another book is called, of course, Rule on Crime, and that opens with the updated version of the Easy Street case, which down here is one of the most notorious cases in crime history in Victoria, for sure. I reckon that's probably pretty well known across Australia. 2 young women killed in their house in Collingwood, inner suburban Melbourne, back in 1977. Total mystery who did it. It's still a total mystery who did it. Let's point that out. We don't know who did it. But recently, only a matter of a couple of months ago, the police arrested a man in Rome, in Italy, and extradited him and brought him back to Melbourne. He had lived in Melbourne as a young fella, and he's now home in his home city, cooling his heels somewhere, and he's going to face some interesting charges. Of course, he is innocent until proven guilty, so we won't be saying too much about him.
Well, can I ask you this? Was this gentleman, was he once living in this area?
I like this. Yeah, you just lead me through this. Yes, he was. He actually, funnily enough, he did live in Collingwood, not far, like many other thousands of people. They lived around there. Yep. He lived around there with his parents, who were dear old souls, Greek people who'd come to Australia, like many others. And he went to a local school, and I think he was only like a big teenager when all this happened. He might have been 17. Oh. So there's nothing to say that he's one way or the other, but he's an interesting. It's interesting that after 47 years, the police have actually found a little bit of reason to go looking for somebody.
Andrew, we're only asking for things that are on the record naturally in this situation, but the person who is in this situation, have they got past or prior crimes to that date of that particular situation?
Oh, no, I wouldn't. No, and if I knew that, I wouldn't answer it, but not to my knowledge. And if he's got any form, it'll be the sort of things that you've got, breaking windows, or you probably did a bit of burglary when you probably stole a bike or two when you were young.
You're talking to Brian now, aren't you? Yeah, that's fine.
Andrew, what about the 2 girls, or the 2, they were young girls that were
young women,
young women that were killed? Were they known to each other? Did they know each other? Was it the same house?
They went to school together up in northeast Victoria. They came from around Benalla, Euroa area, and went to school up there at the local high. They were good mates. They were both called the 2 Sues, we call them. One was Suzanne and one Susan. And they were great and good friends at school up there. And after school, one of them became a secondary school teacher. The other one travelled around the world and so forth. Susan Armstrong, her name was. She came home from Greece, would you believe? She lived on a Greek island for a while in the mid-70s. She got engaged to a Greek guy. She came home with a little 18-month-old boy, and I think she intended to marry her Greek fiancé, who was going to travel to Australia and marry her. That sadly didn't happen because she and her friend, who were living together in a house, this rented house in Collingwood, were murdered. It was almost exactly, it was bang on, it was in January the height of summer. It was January 77.
Okay.
47 years later. Wow.
Yeah. So I'd imagine DNA has had something to do with this men to roam the interest. Is that what's happened?
Yeah, you'd probably imagine. You'd imagine that perhaps the development of DNA in more recent times has helped police eliminate a lot of people because they certainly had a short list of people they were very keen on. And when DNA became a thing, I think they slapped their hands together at the homicide squad and said, beauty, now we're going to find out which of the 8 on the short list did this.
Gotcha.
And guess what? They sent detectives to England to do one bloke, and they sent one up north to do 2 others, and so on and so on. And it wasn't any of those.
Okay, so...
Yeah.
So I know this is hard for you, Andrew, of course. We're tiptoeing through a bindi patch here, but the guy who is in question right now... Was he on the initial shortlist? Do we know?
Well, not on a shortlist at all. I'll tell you what it was. He was apparently picked up, as many people were, around the area by a uniformed copper just because he was driving around in a car with the dirty headlights or something. And they picked him up and apparently looked in the boot and found something in the boot that made him of interest. This is back within days of the murders.
Wow.
And the police interrogated him quite heavily at the time, as they did dozens of people, let's be frank, including probably the odd policeman. So let's be fair here. And they decided that this bloke had nothing to do with it, and away he went. Now, the fact is that his name went on a very long list of people, dozens and dozens of people, who had lived around the area and might have or might not have had some contact with the young women concerned. And his name sat on a long, long list of people in the file for no particular reason. I might add that, somebody like Peter Brock, the racing car driver, well, he'd known these girls. He'd visited the house. Another guy, Bernie Balmer, who's known down in these parts as Bernie the attorney, great criminal lawyer. He was in those days a budding clerk of courts. And he just left high school not long before, and he visited that house because he knew one of the Sues because she'd taught him up at Broadford High School. And in fact, the police knew Bernie had been there because he left his school jumper in the house and had his name stitched in the.
Well, Bernie the attorney, which is a wonderful nickname. He had been to his former teacher's place.
He did.
Oh,
yep.
Jeez.
He was a jovial personality, Bernie.
Yep.
He was larger than life, and still is, and a lovely bloke. Very, he's one of those sort of a fighting lawyer. He's a good defence counsel.
Yep.
He's always been mixed up in the boxing game. He's sort of the honorary lawyer to various, boxing fraternities down here, and well known and well liked by a lot of people. But a very friendly fella, and he was friendly with those young women, as were a lot of people. And, he and dozens of others were spoken to.
Yeah, well, okay.
And of course, none of them killed them.
No, that's exactly right. No, they've got somebody else the eye on the prize at the moment, Brian.
Yes, well, can we move on? Because the Russell Hill and Carole Clay incident, or not incident, murders obviously, but what's going on now? Because Greg Lynn, was he the pilot? Is Greg Lynn the pilot, former pilot?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Can you tell us
Jetstar pilot?
Can you tell us how's that?
Well,
going?
It's March 2020. If you remember, that is basically the weekend when all hell broke loose and COVID descended on Australia. Essentially, that weekend. And the entire media and everybody else was distracted by COVID, naturally, biggest story in the world. And that was the weekend when a four-wheel drive vehicle was found up in the high country in Victoria, right up in the high country at a place called Wonongatta, which is sort of near the Dargo High Plains. And there was a fire, had been lit and scorched the car, it had burnt out a tent. But this was sort of reported to local police down at the nearest big town, which is the city of Sale, fair way away. And nothing much happened about it. It sort of fell through the cracks for many days. And it turned out that these two older couple in their 70s, Russell Hill and Carole Clay, had gone up camping together unbeknownst to their respective families. They were conducting a long-running affair. They were actually had been teenage sweethearts, and they continued their relationship in their autumn years, and they'd gone off up camping up there. and ultimately and vanished. And long story short, they didn't just get lost in the bush; they'd been killed violently. And ultimately, through brilliant police work, many months later, the police arrested this Jetstar pilot called Greg Lynn. And he has been convicted of murdering Carole Clay, but not convicted of murdering her lover, Russell Hill, which is an interesting decision, but a pretty good one from the jury's point of view.
So you're saying this couple were having an affair. At the time, did they have partners? Did they have husbands and wives?
Well, certainly Russell Hill did, and right. I'm not sure about Carole. Carole may well have split up with her husband. But Russell Hill have been married for 50 years. They've both got adult children and grandchildren. Both very nice people, and didn't deserve to be, shot, hacked to bits, and then burnt.
Wow.
No. So the jury found Greg Lynn was only guilty of killing Carole Clay. What was the reasoning behind, if both of them were killed and he was the only one around, what was the reasoning why one got charged?
Well, when this happens and you're the only person present, you own the crime scene. Yeah, the accused owns the crime scene. Yeah, and the story you tell about how it happened becomes the only story on the record because there's no other witnesses to give an alternative idea. And so his story, which some might dismiss as a cockamamie, convoluted and made up story, I wouldn't dare say that, but some might. His story was that he'd got into an argument with this very, nasty, aggressive Russell Hill, and that in this argument, Russell Hill had fallen on a knife and managed to kill himself, because it entered his heart and killed him stone dead. Oh. And he also said that Hill had, shot a one shot from a shotgun, and he claimed that this shot had deflected from the ute mirror of the ute that somebody's driving, and deflected and killed Carole Clay. Now, it would have, he's claiming that there's two absolute 1,000,000-to-1 shots that these people had instantly, and the jury, in its wisdom, and the judge were able to pick their way through that and say, well, we think he killed her with the gun because there was a trace of her brain, a bunch of her skull matter found that had lead shot near it or in it, and they were able to deduce that she'd been shot. And so the jury said she was shot by him, probably to cover up the fact that she was a witness to the violent death of her partner, Russell Hill, and that's the way it panned out.
Hey, Andrew,
so
sorry, mate.
We don't call him a double murderer.
Okay, we need to move on to the Punisher shortly. One last question in two, I suppose, on Greg Lynn. No relation at all to the parties who sadly deceased. No. And absolutely. The second one, what was the number one thing that put him onto the radar for the force?
Well, you know what? These days, if one of you blokes killed the other one, which you could hardly be blamed for, I think the fact that you've got there's cameras everywhere.
Right.
There's cameras everywhere. When you drive up the highway, no matter where you go, a camera is picking up the progress of the car, and the mobile phones. If you're carrying a mobile phone, which really everybody does, that's what caught him. Those two things: roadside cameras up in the ski fields, would you believe, and the fact that Russell Hill, the victim's phone, was moved along with the body from A to B.
Gotcha.
And the police were able to sort that out. And it was brilliant work, but it was highly technical.
Okay, all right, let's move on to, and thank you so much, Andrew Rule. Let's move on to the Punisher.
The Punisher. Well, I've started to call him Sam the Sham. Sam the Punisher, that was his ring name. He's a reasonably big-time kickboxer, but I think his main stream of income was not kickboxing. I think it was something that paid for, Ferraris and all that sort of stuff, and he was heavily involved in the illicit tobacco caper and probably other forms of illicit substances, drugs. And he ended up on the wrong side of other players in that field, And mainly that was because he was suspected of setting up an associate called Kadir Oz, that's spelled O-R-S, back in 2016. And a hitman pulled up in a red Commodore, beware red Commodores, jumps out, shoots Kadir Oz after chasing him a fair way, which shows he was a pretty fit hitman. And it is suspected by all concerned that this bloke, Sam the Punisher, Abdul Rahim, had set up his associate. And that earned him the undying enmity of a bloke who's now in Iraq, a bloke called Kaz, known by the nickname Kaz. And Kaz is another Middle Eastern gangster, essentially. And he's been ordering all these tobacco war fires and arsons from over there, or paying young blokes in Melbourne to, light up, burn down, torch shops and all the rest of it. And also to harass and chase the Punisher around. And the Punisher has survived he had survived before he was shot dead, several attempts on his life. I don't know if you're aware of this, but he's the guy that was shot several times with a machine pistol at his own cousin's funeral. It was an amazing.
Wow,
Andrew,
he survived it.
Andrew, we have the drug wars here. It's between the Alameddines and the Hamsies. That was last year, the year before. Is this connected at all, or is it just more? If you're in Sydney, that's your territory, or are they connected? Something to do with Melbourne as well?
I wouldn't like to say something that could be written down and used against me.
Right,
but I'm going to say this: it is a general observation. Most crime is drug related, and we'll call tobacco drug related for this example.
Gotcha.
And there's no doubt that those Middle Eastern crime groups are linked up in some ways, not necessarily all in the same camp, but some will be, money flows from high to low like water.
Yeah.
And they will all be linked up in some way. But those names that you mention up there are not names we talk about down here. We've got other Middle Eastern families down here doing much the same stuff. It's very similar set of crimes. Gotcha. I have to say, your blokes are pretty willing up there.
Yeah. Yes.
Andrew, thank you so much, mate. I'll be taking up a lot of your time. You are the host of the Life and Crimes with Andrew Rule, the podcast, Herald Sun Associated Editor, which is your good self. Now, for those who want to hear or read more on yourself, Rule on Crime is the book. It's been reissued, updated with the Easy Street murder case. Thank you so much, Andrew, again, for sharing the time with us on a True Crime Tuesday on a Monday.
On a Monday.
Beautiful.
It's a pleasure, and we'll do it again sometime.
Look forward to it. In all the good bookstores, you can find Rule on Crime by Andrew Rule. What, you're still here? Well, you can see more on the Joel and Fletch socials and catch us live on SEN Radio, you beautiful humans.